Welcome to Three Devs and a Maybe, the podcast series for beginner web developers and general web enthusiasts. Now, introducing your show hosts, Michael Budd, Fraser Hart, Lewis Keynes, and Ed Mann.
Hi everyone, and welcome to another episode of Three Devs and a Maybe. I'm joined by my usual co-host, Ed Mann.
Hello.
And we have a special guest on today in the form of Simon Holywell. So, hi Simon, how you doing?
Hello, it's great to be here. Doing well.
Good. Thanks so much for coming on and giving us your spare time to come and talk to us about functional programming. So, I can't get my words out tonight. Functional programming.
Some would say you're in a bit of a funk.
That's definitely going to have to be edited out. Shocking. But yeah, thanks for coming on the show. Yeah, looking forward to grilling you with some questions on functional programming. And we should say as well, unfortunately, Lou is not with us tonight. He's snowed under with work. And it kind of occurred to me this morning that we've not really updated people on the Fraser situation, have we?
He's still in America, and I think he's coming back tomorrow. Or,
yes.
Yeah, it'll be tomorrow for us, but this will be probably next week. So he would have been back from, since Thursday.
So depending when this comes out, you may have already heard from him or not, but he is coming back soon, and he is in one piece and alive. So watch this space. He should be back with us soon. So, this week's podcast then is going to be on functional programming, as I say, and Simon is, I hope he doesn't mind me saying this, bit of an expert on the matter, or certainly more of an expert than I am, and it's definitely an area of programming that I am completely new to, and I have very little knowledge. I know Ed knows a lot more again than I do, but hopefully we can just a basic kind of exploration of the subject and just give people who have never had any experience of functional programming a little taste of what it is and why they might want to use it. So I guess probably a good place to start would be, Simon, would you mind giving a little bit of introduction for yourself?
Sure. I mean, I'm a lead developer at a company in Brighton in the UK called Mosaic, and we do mostly PHP stuff, apps and websites. And we're a reasonably small team, but we pump out some really nice stuff. Not really using functional code there at the moment, but we're on our way.
Bringing it in slowly but surely.
That's right.
So it's something that functional programming is more a personal kind of hobby of yours, I guess?
I guess that's a fair way to put it. It is. And I guess I've been programming in Scala a bit, and that doesn't necessarily fit well with the development team we've got at the moment. So I looked at, things that could be transferred over to PHP and what you could do there. And whilst we've implemented some sort of functional stuff, it tends to be a bit more difficult for new people to pick up than your standard PHP 00 stuff that everybody's seen before.
Do you want me asking what's your kind of your history in terms of what languages you learnt first and how you got into functional side of things?
Sure. I mean, I started out learning a bit of HTML in high school, basically to throw a website together. And from there, I think we learnt Pascal and...
Yay, Pascal, back in the day.
No, before that, of course, it was Logo, the very beginning of the little old BBC computer. And then it would have been Java, I guess, at university, and some Visual Basic. But sort of through that time, I'd been building websites on my own, and, I needed, just as Rasmus, I needed a guest book, so PHP was pulled out and strapped into the site. It's that kind of thing, where everybody, I don't know whether you guys did the same sort of thing, but around that time, everybody took their hobby or whatever and turned it into a website. So in my case, it was a skateboarding website. I think a couple of my friends did mountain bike websites or whatever. I went off to university, did Java, and sort of kept doing PHP in the background. And actually my sort of final year project was a PHP e-commerce website. And then sort of PHP just made sense because that's where the jobs were, and it meant that I could work in agencies easily and not be doing the same thing all the time.
So what version then of PHP did you come in at then?
Yeah, so I started with PHP 3.
Hey, back in the day.
So it really was quite simplistic and, mashing your queries straight into your HTML.
Lots of includes, yep.
Yeah, exactly. As soon as you discovered that you could do an include, that everything was an include.
It's like the dry principle. I could do it now.
And then sort of, as I said, I picked up Java and followed sort of the implementation of Java's OO in PHP from then on, really, and stuck with it. Got a job doing PHP stuff, and it's kind of been what I'm doing ever since. But on the side, I've been programming in other languages like Python and so on for personal interest, and more recently that led to Scala and functional programming.
Very good. So what drew you to Scala in particular?
Really simple, really. I saw that the guys up at The Guardian were doing a course on Coursera with Martin Odersky, and so I thought I might as well do that as well. And because before that I kind of said, oh, it's academia, I don't really need to look at that. So just went from there, really did both the courses and picked up a lot of stuff and just started seeing how that could be incorporated into PHP.
Because I did the course as well. It's really good, weren't they? I think, did you do the reactive one as well?
That's right, yeah. I did the reactive one afterwards.
Still need to do that one. That one looks really cool as well.
That one's good. It's got 3 instructors in that one.
The Eric guy, the guy with the crazy t-shirts on. That's where I remember him from the...
That's right, Eric Meyer. Yeah. If you do the course, you'll hear all about the happy path as well.
Oh, brilliant. So I suppose the first question really, like from the function, is what is functional programming? I think that's kind of what people normally think. Why do I care about it? You've got all object orientated and stuff like that. And why should we care about functional programming?
Yeah, so good question. I guess the thing that is interesting from my point of view is that it's a way of, there's so many different ways you can explain it, and some of them get really complicated. But the easiest way I find, and the most shocking way, is just to say it's essentially programming without a state to a certain degree, and trying to make what you are working with immutable, so that you don't then start assembling global state, which you have to, you build this rickety tower of OO stuff that you have to assemble before your tests come along. So that's kind of what it's avoiding, and the nice outcome of that is that when done nicely, you can make concurrent programming easier. So that's not something that maybe PHP's sort of core focus is directed at, but in the future, if we want to start making use of those cores and all the computing power that they bring, we may need to start thinking about that. And I think you had a previous guest on before who was doing P-threads.
Yes, yeah, Joe Watkins.
So there's some work in that direction. P-threads looks really nice. So functional programming could help to avoid collisions in those threads.
Trying to remove that kind of problem that the big OO, I think, because the whole problem was we used to think, oh, it's vertically scaling, we would just get faster servers and everything, but then we realized, oh no, not anymore. Server people can't help us anymore, so now we have to kind of think horizontally, and as you say, like concurrency and splitting things out, parallel, stuff. So yeah, it's kind of gone into our hands now where we have to start thinking of this. That's right. And
I haven't had a chance to check out P-threads, but I really want to. I really, really want to.
It is very cool.
I was going to say, I kind of, was obviously, as Ed knows, I just, one of the modules I did in my last term at uni was concurrency and parallelism. We tended to use Java for the majority of it, and I was really hoping that we would have played with some functional languages, but we did a very little bit with OccamPy, which I don't think is greatly known language, but yeah, it was quite difficult. And like you say, the idea of states, as soon as you start playing with it, you realize it is quite an obstacle and things can go horribly wrong. And it was explained to me, obviously, that functional languages is a great way to kind of counteract that, but we didn't really have enough playing time with that to try and to see the advantages. But
like all the threading, the OO world of synchronized blocks and volatile and all this stuff.
Well, yeah. Like Java seems like it has all the tools to help you do it. It doesn't seem like necessarily the best way, I guess. It's like local threads and
it can get quite messy and testing it and stuff, and it's quite unpredictable. So with this removal of state, I suppose one of the questions for a very imperative mind, person who thinks, how do I get stuff done? It's like, how do I loop through things? Surely I need state and local variables to be able to store things, accumulators and stuff. What possible thing could I do without this?
Yeah, so that's a good question. There's a number of ways that you can take, I guess, what you'd usually encapsulate in a class, maybe some data, and pass it around between functions. So you can pass it in as parameters, of course, as we all know. You can pass it back out as a return value. If you want to avoid accumulators and state and so on, you can use things like recursion. And the beauty of recursion is that you can use it really plainly just to loop over like a for loop, or you can use it to build nested tree structures like representations of the file system, where that function is reusable. Whereas if you were going to do that with a for loop, you'd have to have maybe nested for loops or something like that to facilitate the same structure. So the idea is with recursion, you have a function that then calls itself, or it calls itself via another function once it's finished operating. So that in the case of an array, for example, you could have a function that takes in an array, and every time it recurses, it passes in the same array again with the tail value dropped off, so that the next time it gets the next value. If that makes sense.
Yeah, it's kind of like thinking of it more like what I want to do instead of how to do it, isn't it? Where it's like this actually, and you can explain it, look, this is what it's doing. It's, very printing off the head and then just returning, saying, I want to then call whatever the tail was, and then have your base case just saying, look, if it's empty now, don't worry about it. Exactly.
And the thing is then you then are able to create abstractions around that so that the same recursive function can work on different shapes of information.
And I mean, that's it. It's all about reusability and making these functions as generic as possible. Generics, as obviously everyone knows that from the Java and all those worlds. So it's the idea of, being able to reuse these in type classes and all that fun stuff. But I suppose the one trouble is, and you will probably find this when you're doing stuff like, especially out on the JVM and in PHP, is stack overflows and stack frame overflows. Because we're calling a function all the time and you're creating up all these frames that each function has a frame. Then obviously what happens is it builds up, and then these languages weren't really made for that kind of work. I was wondering, is that have you found that in PHP that you've kind of battled that kind of problem?
You can hit it. I personally never have, but that's probably because I'm not working with big enough data. I'm not cool enough. But, but other languages have developed ways around it. And, one of the ways you can do it is with something called tail-recursion, which is difficult to explain. It's a lot easier to read some code, but essentially it allows the compiler to short-circuit the recursion because it can see the direction the result's going in, essentially. So it can return a result faster with less recursion. The thing is, with like you say, with recursion, if you have a really, really massive data set, or you don't have a very good exit condition, then you'll reach the limit really quickly. But the same thing can be said of a while loop. If you have a while loop that's while true, it will.
That's so true. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I commonly think of a tail, like the way I kind of try and read it with TailRecursion, really what it's trying to do is convert this recursive function into just a while loop, really, where it's just able to reuse that stack frame again and again without having to, say, to kind of build up this kind of nested kind of hell of, we're going to use up all the memory. So I was like, what, we were talking about like Scala, is like, what other functional languages are there?
Well, there's a language for everyone, I guess.
Yeah.
There's, you can write functional code in PHP, you can write functional code in Python, you can write functional code in JavaScript. Anything that supports a closure will allow you to create quite complicated functional code. There are languages that are more focused at making pure functional code like Haskell, and they are sort of more true to the mathematics behind functional programming.
Yeah, and then, because I think that, I mean, do you, have you ever used those languages? Would you ever consider them kind of going that route, or do you feel you always will like the idea of having a bit of imperative kind of nature in a language?
I have programmed a bit of Haskell. I don't think it's something I could use professionally just now, because I don't know anyone else who programs in it.
It is, yeah, exactly. It's quite hard to find, and the IO monads and all that stuff, and yeah.
Yeah, getting people with Scala experience is really difficult, really, really difficult. So yeah, I don't see it being a professional. I do look at it, and I run Xmonad, which is a tiling window manager, all written in Haskell on my Linux machine. So I configure that all in Haskell.
Cool. Oh, I use Awesome at the moment. I was thinking about Xmonad, but Awesome's another tiling window manager. Yeah, I love tiling window managers. They are the greatest.
They're really nice.
Sorry, it's going to be a really stupid question and you'll probably just want to shout idiot at me. But I'm hopefully just representing all the people who are listening who don't have a clue about functional programming. But I'll say I'm quite ignorant to the whole thing, really. But just listening to you guys talking about recursion, and obviously, I think you kind of touched on this, but obviously the kind of thing that people always mention when you talk about recursion is, okay, it's very powerful, but potentially very dangerous. And from the small amount of experience that I do have, which is minimal, but when I was playing with a language or compile, it was a compiled language. And the thing that a lecturer would always say to us is, look, it's very hard to compile a program in OccamPy because the compiler was so strict, and it would look out for things like starvation, deadlock, all that kind of things for you. But obviously I'm aware that you don't have that luxury in PHP. So is that something that, obviously Ed was talking about the nightmare of testing concurrent programming in Java, which is true. But how do you begin to test in something like PHP for recursive loops, that kind of thing?
That's the difficulty of a dynamic language. You're kind of stuck,
yeah,
because you're parsing it at runtime, and that's why I look at Scala and Haskell and so on. Obviously, they're compiled language, and they do all those machine optimizations to make your code run faster and warn you of impending doom before it's compiled and thrown out there as a shared library. So with PHP, the only way really with a recursive loop like that is to run it. I think maybe you could get something in PHP mess detector or something to do it, but I don't think it exists at the moment. I'm not sure.
So is it, I mean, I don't know if I'm being unfair here, but is it fair to say that functional programming in PHP isn't something that comes naturally to it, that it's something it's almost tacked on? Or?
Well, I guess PHP didn't have closures until relatively recently, and anonymous functions. So it is something that's been slowly added in, and there's, to my mind, although I may be wrong, there's resistance in the internals group to adding functional stuff.
Really? Wow.
Yeah, where pulling in, sort of mimicking some of the Java syntax for OO side of things was more accepted. And I guess the thing is, with the functional stuff, you're aiming at a very, or maybe that's unfair, a smaller target market than you are with the OO stuff. So PHP is installed all over the place. But of all the people that are using it, there's a select few doing functional, and most people are doing OO. So if you're going to spend a lot of time building new features into the language and then supporting them and writing tests for them and all that sort of stuff that's required to maintain the language, then you're going to go for features that everybody's using, would be my guess. And so yes, PHP has got closures, but their syntax isn't as nice as Haskell, and it won't be, and it'll never be a compiled, well, I never say never, but it's unlikely to be a compiled language. It may be compiled and cached or jittered, but yeah, so it is something that is a little bit on the edge of PHP's core competency.
And has Rasmus said what his opinion is on bringing more kind of functional syntax into the core? Or does he sit on the fence?
I don't know. I haven't seen anything about that. I think his general take on the whole thing is not to add any features.
It's done. It's like, there we go, in stone, frozen.
Exactly. PHP 2 was done, and you don't need OO. You don't need frameworks. You just, use functions, use includes. That's, because there was a project that was released by, I think it was WePay when he was working there, called WePloy, and I looked at it because I thought, it's a PHP deployment. Everybody's using Capistrano. Let me have a look at the PHP one that Rasmus has built, and that's all it was
really
functions and all sort of thrown together. So he may obviously think differently, but from the outside, that's how it appears to me.
Okay, that's interesting, because I think we've had other people on the show kind of say similar things. So.
Yeah, I think kind of stated that kind of the same opinion that I don't think he, as you say, he probably would have liked PHP 2, and that would be it. And But I think it's nice though that he's kind of allowed that these people want it in. If more people want it in than not, then yeah, it'll go in. So, you know, and I think the thing is like this is so new kind of, I mean, this is the thing. Why are we only doing functional programming now? Like, how long has it been around for? It's been around decades.
I guess, yeah, well, it definitely has. I mean, it's probably one of the first language was probably Lisp in the 1950s.
Wow. I thought it was like 70s, so it goes back even further, 50s.
Yeah, and before that it was sort of all formalized mathematics. It wasn't actually runnable languages.
So that is insane, isn't it? Lisp, and then obviously, yeah, that's crazy. And Haskell came in like 1980s.
Same as Erlang? Was that the 80s? Or?
Erlang was 80s, yeah. And then, I mean, this is the thing, like now, I mean, we all kind of, it's hard because what you then get is people in type 2 camps, you know, thinking, oh, I'm a functional guy or I'm an OO guy. And that's when I kind of like a language like Scala, which you can see some code written in Scala and people are like, well, what is going on here? But if you do it right, you can take the best of both paradigms. Like the way of thinking of OO for certain problems is good, but then also adding in the functional goodness as well. And I think that kind of is where I think it will win out, where you can do a bit of both. I'm not sure if you two kind of agree with that maybe, or do you think maybe we should be more thinking of a functional thing solely?
Scala's nice and it does what it does quite well. And like you say, it's nice to be able to dip in and out of OO, especially as you're learning. The other advantage of being on the JVM, of course, is you've got access to all the libraries that have been written in Java.
Yep, that's so true.
And again, in the Microsoft space, you've got F# on the .NET platform, and again, you can access all the libraries through F# that you can through C#, and you can mix C# and F#. So there's a similar there's the Microsoft and there's the JVM, and they're both quite similar. I think quite a bit of work in going towards having languages that combine both paradigms, and like you say, you've got your sort of for want of a better word, extremists that will say that, you know, Haskell isn't good enough. We need something pure than Haskell.
Yeah, we can't do any IO. No monads, no. It's not pure anymore.
I guess for me, I'm kind of thinking what's going to be around in 10, 20 years' time. And I think like most people agree, like obviously the JVM will still be around. Don't know what form Java will be in or whether it'll still be around. But something like Scala probably seems something for me I'd be more interested in. Whereas I know people rave about Erlang, but then I have to think about in terms of my career and everything. I guess I don't see that many jobs out there for Erlang.
It's a niche. It is a niche language, but it solves the problem, which is like the Ericsson kind of telephone networking and stuff really well. So when you need it, you actually need that kind of. It solves it perfectly. But as you say, it's kind of. I think that's where OO still kind of is really useful and popular today because it solves a lot of problems. Yeah. Some, you know. And everyone's kind of been, the whole 90s kind of was, let's just, you know, pretty much force everyone down the OO path. OO is the only way, for better or worse. And, you know, we went from procedural to OO, and now we're kind of thinking more functional kind of in, you know, the kind of common, you know, you can talk about it now and stuff.
Do you think that we wouldn't be having this conversation then if like you say, obviously with the issue of now going down the parallel route and trying to get performance out that way?
Yeah, I don't know. Simon, do you think we would be going functional if we didn't have to?
I think we still would. I think closures are so useful. They would have been added to PHP at some point, even if someone didn't have an eye on concurrency. And I'm not even sure that whoever contributed that did. So yeah, we would definitely be talking about functional PHP, functional programming, even if we were not concerned about concurrency, I think.
Random tangent. What do you think of PHP's implementation of closures with like the use keyword? Are you a fan of that, or would you prefer not to see that, not having to declare what you're going to use inside that function or that closure? Sorry.
I like the fact that it's explicit.
Yep.
I like, but I don't like the fact that I can't alias those variables inside the function.
That is a very good point. Yeah, I've never actually thought of that. Yeah, that should. Yeah, I do. Same with you. I do like the fact we explicitly say, because you can look at some code. Like in a language like JavaScript even, and be confused, like, where's this variable coming from? Oh, it's already in this scope. I suppose actually we probably should explain what a closure is.
Okay, so let's say 3 types of functions in PHP. You've got your standard function, which you have to give a name. You've got a lambda function or anonymous function, which you say like, you assign a function to a variable effectively. And then you've got a closure, which is like a anonymous function, but you can pass in some state from the current program into that function for you to reuse. And a common way or common reason for doing that is passing in Lambda functions as variables in that use statement you were mentioning a moment ago. The value of those variables set at the time of the function's declaration. So when it's later called, those values will be the same as when they were declared. They don't get overridden later on in the program. So it's basically injecting the current state of a variable at declaration time into a function where you can make use of it.
And that's, again, that makes obviously side effects, and you don't have any of these weird bugs that come up if it's all there at that time. And I suppose another thing with functional stuff is immutability. The idea of like immutable lists and stuff like that don't change. They just, they're clever in the way they do, but they in a sense make a copy of themselves or what's changed. So you never actually affecting one list. You don't have that problem of kind of interfering with the whole synchronize thing where, you're having to hold onto the shared resource. But you can still do that if you want, like with shared like software transactional memory and stuff like that. But
yeah, that's right. We don't want to talk about that though because PHP doesn't have very good support.
That's what I was thinking. Yeah, I was thinking, let's move on from that. One thing it does have good support for though is higher order functions. I'm right in thinking a higher order function, all that is just a function that takes a function as an argument or returns a function.
Yeah, in its simplest form. Yeah.
I think we then, because in JavaScript, everyone's like, JavaScript's great, you can do all this stuff, you can pass around functions as if they're just first-class citizens and stuff, but you can do that in PHP as well. And I think, obviously, you've done it, been able to do it since 5.3, but I still think people don't get that and don't understand that they can do that.
Yeah, that's right. It's very, very powerful. And like I say, you can pass functions in as parameters to functions, but like you were talking about a moment ago, you can pass them in as state to the closure as well. The handy thing about it is it allows you to sort of, you can easily create things like copies of an array map and so on, where you're passing in a list and a function to operate on that list. So by creating a higher order function, you can recreate that in your own code for your own specific use case or your own abstraction. So yeah, they help you build highly expressive code, and in Haskell and Scala, it looks really nice.
That's it. I was going to say that is the syntactic sugar in other languages definitely leaves PHP behind.
Yeah, it's a little it's a little bit disappointing, but then it's where PHP comes from, and again, JavaScript isn't that elegant to look at.
That's very true as well. I mean, it's a C-like language, isn't it? And that's kind of where they're keeping the keywords and stuff looking the same. They've kind of had to go down that route. I suppose actually talking about PHP, what additions would you like? I mean, this is kind of in this fictional world, like the additions you'd like to see in PHP in regard to like functional programming. Are there a couple of things maybe from the Scala world or Haskell world?
There are a lot of things. But I guess the main thing would be really getting generics from hip hop PHP into PHP.
That would be cool. Yep.
And it would be nice to have pattern matching, but we can kind of live without it. But it would be nice to have it, and there has been a proposal for it.
Really?
Previously, yes, there has. So, and it's nice to see that we're getting generators. We've got generators. So, I mean, off the top of my head, I can't really say what my favorite feature would be that we're missing, but it would definitely be nice to have generics and pattern matching.
Generics would be very cool. I think they're kind of holding up. I mean, they held off on the whole, I think Joe Watkins and Phil Sturgeon were part of like the array of kind of thing, type hinting on arrays. And the reason was because of generics. So hopefully, fingers crossed, we do get generics one day.
So I have a quick question for both of you, really, I guess. But I have a friend who he's a Java programmer, and he started mixing in a little bit of Scala. I don't have first-hand experience of Scala, but I know he was doing this, and I know he had not a complaint, but someone had a little word with like one of the project managers or Scrum Master, whatever they have, and basically said, look, we don't know what he's doing. We don't understand what he's wrote. And the project manager was kind of like, well, that's your problem. You need to keep up and learn Scala, which I thought was really cool. Sounds great. And I'm just trying to think let's put this like in the PHP perspective. But if say someone starts going down the functional route and they start putting all this code and then the other 4 programmers are die-hard OO programmers, and they don't understand what's going on. Who do you think's got the problem there, and what's the solution? I guess because Simon, so you said you don't use functional programming at work. Is that right? Or
not to a great extent, no. I mean, array maps and recursion and that sort of thing, of course, but anything more complicated, not really. I mean,
is that for that reason, or is it different reasoning?
There are a number of reasons for it. You know, one of them being that once you get to a certain point, it can become inelegant in PHP.
That's a very nice way of putting it.
Yeah,
I think that was a very nice way of putting it. Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, and that's one way. The other thing is trying to bring people on board who understand it. You know, like you say, a lot of people have seen an anonymous function when they're throwing it into SPL autoload register, and that's about it. So unless they've had JavaScript experience, they won't have seen sort of an evented architecture or anything like that before, so it won't make as much sense. You know, having said that, I do know of a company, I can't mention the name, but they a system in PHP. Their whole team was PHP, and they're rewriting their system. They've recently had a change at the top, and that person wanted everything written in Java. People pushed back, and they've ended up writing it in Scala. Ooh. So there's no reason why a team of PHP devs couldn't move over to writing Scala. Obviously, they've put training and support in place to encourage it. But I think it's very, very dangerous to turn around and say, I'm OO only. I never want to learn anything new. I think that would be a mistake. Yeah,
I completely agree. I mean, that was my feeling too. But it's interesting. I guess it depends on the context. And again, it's like you say, that company's got time to do the training. If it's a small agency who hasn't got that kind of budget, it could be kind of hard, I guess.
And I think you can kind of you can use all the array, as you were saying, like array map and all those things, and start using those, and you'll start to learn. And it's the way of being able to generalize these functions, that because you're passing in a function that gets it maps over the collection and stuff, you're using this generality, which is like generics, but in such a nice way that this function can be used in so many different ways now. That the opportunity for doing anything with it, really, because the fact that all it does is literally maybe like the map one loops over it and just calls that function and returns whatever that value is, and then stuff like filtering and stuff like that. So there are things in PHP that you can use. So say, like in an array, why not, instead of, having a for loop that you probably, the typical way you see it is like going for each of them and maybe return, just changing the assignment on, but array map is a better way of doing it, because it's more kind of declaratively, this is what I want to do. I'm mapping over that. Oh, I know now, I'm mapping over that with this function. And that's what I'm doing on each instance of it. Whereas with the other way, with the imperative way, what you're doing is you're kind of telling it how to do it, but then that could be a lot more lines of code. And also there's a lot more problem, like there's more areas that could cause issues.
Yeah, I think also, holding the compiler's hand gets a bit boring.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Exactly. They know how to do it. I think another thing that I found people get confused with is getting to grips that functions aren't special, because we all have this kind of, especially in our world, the OO world and imperative world, that a function is this special thing that, you declare it and you call it. But the idea that you can actually just pass it around as a variable, it's like, it's as good as an integer now to me, or it's as good as a Boolean. People kind of don't get that. I think I find that there's a bit more kind of restriction, like, that's weird. Why can a function just be a value? It's special, surely.
One of the things I was going to ask you was having a look at your site before we came on, but I see you're writing a book. How's that going?
That's right, I am. It's it takes longer than you expect writing a book.
I could expect it to take a long time, yeah.
Writing blog posts is much easier.
Just to go, even I struggle with a blog post. I don't know how a full book, that must be a completely different book.
It is, and a lot more people involved in doing layout and editing and all that sort of stuff. So it goes through many hands. At the moment, I've been told that it's likely this month, in July, that it's going to be published. And hopefully it is. It's from my perspective, it's ready and laid out. It's got a front cover. It's pretty much ready to go. There's just a few little things that need to be tidied up, and of course, ebook versions of it produced and so on, ready to go. So, but yeah, it's almost there. It covers a lot of the things we've already talked about. and a lot of stuff we haven't, like monads and things like that as well.
That's cool. And so like, and it's directed at the PHP audience with like PHP examples and how you can use it in today's, like in any day programming?
Yeah, it is. Everything's written with PHP examples. It's all written with PHP 5.3 examples, so anybody can pick it up and use it.
That's very cool.
So you just pick it up and go. You know, if your production system is still running an old version of PHP, which quite a few people are, you can still, make use of a lot of the stuff in there.
That is absolutely great. One other thing, actually, I suppose this may get a bit kind of technical, but function composition. And I'm just wondering, partial application, and maybe that would be quite cool to have that in PHP, but I'm just wondering for the audience, maybe if you don't mind like explaining what that is.
Partial function application, in its really simplest terms, we'll take it, is if you've got a function that takes, say, 3 parameters, but later on when you want to call it, you only want to pass it 1 parameter, you can create a partial function a partial application of that function that defaults the 2 values and accepts 1 value as a parameter. So the most simple way of doing it is wrapping that function in another function, and that will give you a partial function application. The beauty of that, as you mentioned, is that when you compose functions, you can get 2 functions that don't look like they can be composed, but with a little bit of massaging, with some partialness, they can be.
That is, and that is exactly, that's really the power of functional programming, is just thinking of functions as these tools that you can use again and recompose out of different ones. And I think that's kind of another thing with the functional world compared to the OO world, is that functional, we kind of think of, we have simple kind of functions that do one task and they do it well. In the OO world, we're very much kind of reinventing the wheel all the time. If like, now I need, the whole idea of mapping, so it's like, well, I need a kind of a list that I want to map over. So I want to go through each of the lists, and I just want to print out all the users' names or return all the users' names. You'd make a whole function for that in an OO world, or a method for that, in this, get names. But in this world, you can just say, look, I've got my map function, and I can just pass it in, an anonymous function that I can then say, this is what I want to do for this. And it's just really generalized in that kind of activity and making it far more expressive. So when someone's looking at code, all you're doing is mapping over that.
Yeah, that's right. It's very, very handy. One function, just stepping sideways slightly, one function that was added to PHP reasonably recently is nice for doing that sort of stuff, even in for loops, is the array column function.
Ben Ramsey, I think he.
Yes.
Awesome. Mickey, have you got any?
Yeah, I was just going to ask. Really, I mean, for anyone who really wants to start doing some more functional programming, who hasn't touched it yet, aka me, what's the, other than obviously waiting for your book to come out, which I will probably almost definitely be buying, but what are the good resources out there for anyone who can't wait for that and wants to get their teeth into it?
If specifically for PHP.
I was thinking of PHP, but if you'd rather talk about any other languages, then that's fine.
To be honest, PHP, there's very, very little. Very, very little. You'd probably be looking at something like Haskell's Learn You a Haskell, I think it is, or something like that. It's a book online. It's
great name.
It's a nice book. It's free to read online. And that would be the easiest access for learning some functional code. Another option would be, if you want to learn Scala, Twitter have put out a lot of educational documentation that they use to bring their engineers up to speed as well, because they use Scala quite extensively through their stack. But so PHP, you're out of luck, I'm afraid.
Until your book comes out, though. Then we're in. Absolutely.
Was that one of the reasons that spurred you on to do the book then? That there was a gap there that no one had really kind of covered?
Yeah, I think so. It certainly contributed. And it was just also an interesting way of understanding more of PHP, really, exploring more and more of PHP, because prior to writing it, I never actually had a use for what PHP in PHP world are called functors. They're not real functors. They're function objects. and that is a function that has the under invoke method in it. A class that has the under invoke method in it, basically, which is a magic method that allows you to call a class kind of like a function. So you can therefore, with this class, you could have a more reusable closure, essentially.
That is very cool. I haven't actually thought of that. Yeah, the invoke. Yeah, that would be very cool.
Cool. I also saw from your site that you've done some talks before, or I've seen the one at PHP Hampshire. Is that something you've enjoyed doing, or something you're going to be doing more in the future?
Hopefully I'll do a little bit more in the future. I have enjoyed it. It's
Is it nerve-wracking getting up on the stage? I always think, hopefully I don't say anything wrong.
It definitely is. And the worst thing is when you start forgetting the order of your slides.
Oh, no. I prepared for this. I've revised so much.
But yeah, so I think I've given that talk 3 times at Brighton PHP and PHP Hampshire, like you say, and down in Dorset PHP as well. You're
quite big on the meetup scene. You like going to these kind of events?
When I can. To be honest, I don't get an awful lot of time between sort of work and family. But when I can, I try and get to Brighton PHP and a couple of other groups in Brighton as well. But it's a bit of a struggle.
Yeah, I can imagine. Yeah, is the Brighton one? Is it quite a big community then? I guess.
It's quite a big community, but it's very fragmented, and there are quite a lot of people doing PHP.
Yeah.
But the meetup doesn't tend to attract as many people as you might think, because I think there's a lot of people going to there's a Drupal meetup as well, and I think a lot of people are going there, and that kind of fragments it a little bit.
Right.
And additionally, I think it sounds horrible, but maybe less passion in the PHP community in Brighton than there is in, say, the Ruby or Python community in Brighton.
The hipsters.
Right.
Those hipsters, God. Oh, dear. Well, thank you so much again for coming on, Simon.
Thanks very much for having me.
Yeah, thanks for coming on, Simon. Really appreciate you giving up your spare time.
Thanks, guys.
Okay,
cheers.
Well, that is the end of this week's episode. So, everyone, we'll speak to you next week. Bye.
Cool. Thanks. Bye.
You've been listening to 3 Devs and a Maybe. You can contact us at contact@3devsandamaybe.com or follow us on Twitter at 3 Devs and a Maybe.